Men will be required to pay child support before the baby is even born. Imagine a world where the simple act of intimacy suddenly binds a man to lifelong financial obligations starting from the very moment a pregnancy is claimed, long before any child enters the picture. What if new legislation across multiple states and even at the federal level could compel biological fathers to cover at least half of all out of pocket medical expenses related to pregnancy and delivery, including health insurance premiums, effectively turning conception into the starting point for child support enforcement? This shift is not some distant hypothetical, but a growing reality driven by bills that aim to redefine parental responsibility from the earliest stages of life. And it raises profound questions about fairness, trust, and the future of relationships between men and women in our society. If you have ever wondered why more men seem to be stepping back from dating, marriage, and traditional family structures, staying with me through this entire discussion will reveal how these proposed laws could accelerate that trend in ways that affect everyone, from individual choices to broader societal patterns, and why understanding the full implications might just change how you view personal freedom and responsibility moving forward. Now, let us dive straight into the heart of what is happening with these emerging laws around prenatal child support and how they fit into the larger picture of men choosing to walk away from relationships and the dating scene altogether. The core idea behind bills like the Supporting Healthy Pregnancy Act, introduced by Representative Ashley Hinson from Iowa, is to require states to set up systems where the biological father of a child would be responsible for paying at least 50% of the out of pocket costs associated with pregnancy and delivery. This includes everything from medical appointments and procedures to health insurance premiums that the mother might incur during those 9 months. The legislation frames this as a way to share the financial load more evenly and support healthy pregnancies. But when you look closer at the details and the timing, it becomes clear that it could introduce new layers of complexity and potential friction in how men and women navigate intimacy and accountability. To understand why this matters so deeply, it helps to step back and consider the current landscape of child support obligations in most places across the country. Traditionally, child support orders have typically begun after the birth of a child, once paternity is established and a court has reviewed the circumstances. That approach has its own set of challenges and debates, but it at least waited until there was a living child to support. Now, with proposals like the one from Representative Hinson, the conversation is shifting earlier, potentially holding men accountable for costs from the point of conception onward. Some states already have variations of this in place or are moving in that direction, with examples in places like Texas, Iowa, and Utah, where forms of prenatal responsibility have been discussed or implemented in limited ways. The federal push, including the reintroduction of the Unborn Child Support Act by Representative Claudia Tenney and Senator Kevin Cramer, seeks to apply child support obligations retroactively to the pregnancy period, empowering mothers to seek those payments as a way to ease the burdens they face while carrying a child. In Kentucky, Senate Bill 110 took a notable path through the legislative process, initially aiming to allow child support actions to be filed at any time following conception in the county where the mother resides. The bill ultimately passed out of committee with strong bipartisan backing and moved forward, though an amended version focused more on retroactive application after birth, allowing up to a year post delivery to seek coverage for those prenatal months. Supporters, including pro life lawmakers, argued that since pregnancy involves real and often substantial costs from the earliest stages, it only makes sense for both parents to share in that responsibility as a recognition of the child's development beginning at conception. They pointed to undeniable expenses like prenatal care visits, nutritional needs, medical monitoring, and even larger hospital bills for delivery that can run into thousands of dollars. The reasoning presented was that if both parties contribute to the creation of new life, then both should contribute to its support from the start, framing it as a matter of basic fairness and investment in the next generation. Yet, when you examine these proposals through the lens of real world human behavior and the dynamics that already exist in modern relationships, a different set of concerns emerges that cannot be brushed aside lightly. One of the most immediate issues revolves around the establishment of paternity. In many cases, confirming biological fatherhood reliably happens after birth through DNA testing, which is straightforward and widely available. But if financial obligations kick in during pregnancy, questions arise about how to handle situations where paternity is alleged but not yet proven. A man could find himself facing demands for payments based on a claim of pregnancy without clear verification, opening the door to disputes that strain resources and trust. Courts would need robust mechanisms to address this, but the process itself could become lengthy and costly, adding another layer of legal involvement to what should ideally remain a private matter between two adults. Consider for a moment the story of a young man in his late 20s working hard to build his career and maintain his financial stability after years of observing friends and acquaintances navigate messy breakups and unexpected responsibilities. He meets someone. Things progress naturally, as they often do in dating, and months later he receives notice that he is being named as the father of a pregnancy. Under traditional timelines, he would have time after birth to confirm details and respond accordingly. With prenatal support laws gaining traction, however, the timeline compresses dramatically. He might be required to begin contributing to medical bills and premiums well before any test confirms his role, all while balancing his own bills, rent, and goals for the future. This is not an abstract scenario, but one that plays out in variations across courtrooms and personal lives every day. And expanding obligations earlier only intensifies the stakes. The Supporting Healthy Pregnancy Act specifically targets out of pocket costs, aiming for that 50% split to relieve some pressure on expectant mothers who might otherwise shoulder the full load alone. Proponents highlight cases where women face significant financial hardship during pregnancy, from lost wages due to medical needs to the high price of specialized care. They argue that involving the father earlier creates a shared sense of duty that could strengthen family bonds or at least provide practical support when it is needed most. In a time when healthcare expenses continue to rise and economic pressures affect households at every income level, the appeal of distributing those costs more evenly is understandable on the surface. Yet the implementation raises practical challenges that deserve careful scrutiny, including how to enforce payments when relationships have already ended or when communication between the parties has broken down completely. Expanding on this, let us explore the broader context of why such bills are surfacing now and what they signal about shifting societal priorities. Over recent decades, discussions around family policy have increasingly emphasized support for mothers and children, particularly in single parent households where financial strain is common. Lawmakers on both sides of the aisle have pointed to data showing higher poverty rates or economic instability for families without consistent dual contributions. The Unborn Child Support Act, reintroduced in the Senate and with a companion in the House, seeks to amend existing frameworks under the Social Security Act to ensure that obligations can apply during pregnancy, with retroactive elements to cover those months once an order is in place. This approach is presented as pro family and protective of vulnerable life, aligning with certain ideological viewpoints that view the unborn as deserving of recognition in legal and financial terms from the outset. To paint a fuller picture, imagine the day to day realities for someone caught in this system. A father to be receives paperwork requiring him to cover half of prenatal vitamins, ultrasound fees, doctor visits, and perhaps even a portion of the mother's health plan costs. If the relationship is intact and cooperative, This might feel like a natural extension of partnership, but in cases of separation, casual encounters, or disputed claims, the dynamic changes. Men who are already cautious about involvement due to past observations of how family courts or support systems operate might see these laws as another reason to limit their exposure to potential risks. The emphasis on biological responsibility is clear, but without equally robust safeguards for verifying that responsibility early on, the potential for prolonged legal battles or unfair burdens becomes a real consideration that thoughtful people cannot ignore. Delving deeper into the Kentucky example provides additional insight into how these ideas translate at the state level. Senate Bill 110 began with the intention of allowing actions for child support to start following conception, giving mothers a mechanism to seek assistance for pregnancy related expenses in real time. After committee review and amendments, the focus shifted toward retroactive application, meaning payments could cover up to 9 months of prior costs, but would typically be ordered after the child's birth within the first year. This compromise still extends the look back period significantly compared to standard practices, allowing for reimbursement of items like car seats, clothing, medical premiums, and hospital stays that occurred during gestation. The bill garnered unanimous support in its committee stage, reflecting a consensus that pregnancy costs are legitimate and should not fall solely on one parent. Critics of such measures, including organizations focused on reproductive rights, have expressed concerns that these bills subtly advance concepts of fetal personhood, which could have ripple effects beyond finances into areas like access to certain medical options or broader policy debates. From a practical standpoint, county attorneys and courts might face increased administrative loads in handling prenatal related claims, potentially requiring additional state funding to manage enforcement without overburdening local systems. Supporters counter that the costs are manageable and worthwhile if they result in better outcomes for children and reduce strain on public assistance programs over time. Now, to connect this to the larger patterns we observe in society today, it is worth reflecting on how men have increasingly chosen paths of independence and self focus in response to evolving expectations and legal frameworks. For many, the decision to step back from dating and relationships stems from a careful assessment of risks versus rewards. When stories circulate of men facing extended financial commitments based on allegations or early stage claims, combined with existing challenges in custody, support calculations, and enforcement, the calculus shifts. A man who values his autonomy, career progression, and personal peace might conclude that the potential complications outweigh the benefits of pursuing traditional partnerships, especially in an era where casual interactions can lead to long term obligations without corresponding input on outcomes. Let us take a moment to build out this narrative through the experiences of countless individuals who have shared their perspectives over the years. Picture a man in his 30s who once approached dating with optimism, investing time, energy, and resources into getting to know potential partners. Over time, he witnesses friends dealing with unexpected pregnancies, court mandated payments, and ongoing disputes that drain both finances and emotional well being. He hears accounts of paternity being established late or challenged, leading to years of support orders, even in cases where involvement was minimal. When news of prenatal support bills surfaces, it reinforces his growing sense that the system is tilting in ways that prioritize one set of responsibilities over balanced accountability. Rather than risk becoming entangled in similar situations, he redirects his efforts toward building a stable life on his own terms, focusing on skill development, financial growth, hobbies that bring genuine satisfaction, and maintaining strong platonic friendships that do not carry the same legal or emotional weight. This pattern is not isolated, but reflects a wider recognition among men that observable outcomes matter more than societal messaging about what they should do. Decades of cultural shifts have included strong narratives around female empowerment and independence, sometimes accompanied by critiques of traditional male roles as outdated or problematic. Terms and concepts that highlighted certain behaviors as inherently negative contributed to a climate where men felt scrutinized in everyday settings, from public spaces to workplaces to social interactions. In response, many have embraced a minimalist approach, shedding unnecessary complexities and prioritizing self reliance. They discover that solitude does not equate to loneliness when it is chosen intentionally and filled with purposeful activities. As these prenatal support discussions gain momentum, they add another dimension to that decision making process. Men who practice strong pattern recognition begin to see connections between expanding legal obligations and the broader incentive structures at play. If intimacy can trigger financial duties from conception onward, complete with potential enforcement through state systems, the perceived risk of even low commitment encounters increases. This does not mean men are avoiding all responsibility. On the contrary, many who walk away demonstrate high levels of personal accountability by managing their own lives effectively, avoiding situations that could lead to unintended consequences, and channeling their energy into productive outlets that benefit themselves and, indirectly, society through innovation, entrepreneurship, and community contributions outside of family units. To expand further on the storytelling aspect, consider the journey of a group of friends who grew up hearing messages that men should always step up, provide, and protect without question. As they entered adulthood, they encountered a different reality where expectations remained high for men, while options for opting out or negotiating terms seemed limited. One friend faces a situation where a brief relationship ends and months later support claims arise. Another observes how media and online discussions often frame men as default providers regardless of circumstances. When bills like the Supporting Healthy Pregnancy Act or state level efforts in Kentucky enter the God of public discourse, these men engage in honest conversations among themselves. They weigh the moral arguments for shared costs against the practical realities of proof, timing, and equity in decision making. Many conclude that the wisest path is one of caution and self preservation, leading them to invest in education, fitness, career advancement, and personal hobbies instead of pursuing romance with its attached uncertainties. This shift toward what some describe as walking away is not driven by anger or rejection of women as individuals, but by a clear eyed evaluation of systemic incentives. Men recognize that they have historically buffered much of life's hardships for others, often at personal cost. With changing social norms that emphasize independence for all, they apply the same logic to themselves. They focus on creating comfortable, low drama lives filled with simple luxuries like quality time alone, meaningful pursuits, and financial security that they control directly. Minimalism comes naturally to many as they eliminate elements that no longer serve their well being and double down on those that do. In doing so, they report higher levels of contentment, reduced stress, and a renewed sense of purpose that comes from aligning actions with internal values rather than external pressures. Women, in turn, have voiced frustrations in various online spaces about the difficulty of finding willing partners or maintaining relationships under current conditions. Some express surprise at the reduced interest from men in providing dates, financial gestures, or long term commitments. Others share stories of struggling with solo responsibilities during pregnancy or early parenthood, highlighting the very costs that prenatal support bills seek to address. These accounts illustrate the disconnect that has widened over time. When men observe patterns of high expectations paired with limited reciprocity or safeguards, they adjust their behavior accordingly. They trust direct evidence over promises or cultural ideals, choosing paths that allow them to thrive without the constant navigation of potential pitfalls. Continuing this exploration, it is important to acknowledge that pregnancy and childbirth involve genuine physical, emotional, and financial demands that deserve thoughtful policy responses. Medical expenses can accumulate quickly, from routine checkups to specialized testing or complications that require intervention. Delivery costs alone often reach significant figures, and recovery periods can impact earning potential. Laws aiming to distribute these burdens more evenly attempt to address real needs, particularly for those without strong support networks. However, the effectiveness of such measures depends heavily on fair implementation, clear standards for evidence, and mechanisms that prevent misuse or prolonged conflict. Without those elements, well intentioned policies risk exacerbating divisions rather than fostering cooperation. From a rhetorical standpoint, one might ask what kind of society we are building when financial obligations tied to reproduction extend further backward in time, while other aspects of parental involvement remain uneven. Hey guys, in a world pushing you to own nothing and be happy, crypto is your key to survival. Join Angry's Crypto Academy to master buying, selling, and trading crypto. Make huge profits and safeguard your wealth. Plus, discover the one crypto virtually no one is talking about, poised to create new millionaires in the upcoming bull run. The link is in the description of the video below. Go check it out now. If a man is expected to contribute resources prenatally, does that imply greater voice in related decisions? Or does the framework maintain existing separations between financial duty and other rights? These questions do not have simple answers, but they merit open discussion free from oversimplification. Men who have chosen independence often cite this imbalance as a key factor in their decision, preferring to avoid scenarios where responsibilities accumulate without balanced agency. To build out the narrative even more fully, let us consider the historical trajectory that led to the current moment. For generations, family structures relied on certain assumptions about roles and mutual support. Economic changes, technological advancements, and cultural movements altered those foundations profoundly. Feminism and related advocacy highlighted inequalities and pushed for greater opportunities and protections for women, achievements that reshaped education, workplaces, and legal systems in meaningful ways. At the same time, some of the rhetoric and policies that emerged created unintended consequences for interpersonal dynamics. Men absorbed messages that their traditional contributions were less valued or even viewed negatively in certain contexts. Public discourse sometimes amplified stories of male shortcomings while downplaying parallel issues or systemic pressures affecting men. In response, a quiet but steady movement emerged where men began prioritizing their own development and peace. They learned through direct experience and observation that being alone can bring clarity and freedom that crowded relationships sometimes obscure. They embraced self acceptance, recognizing that personal happiness does not require external validation through partnership. This realization allowed them to shed expectations that no longer aligned with their lived realities. Instead of chasing validation or attempting to meet ever shifting standards, they focused on controllable aspects of life such as health, finances, skills, and leisure activities that recharge them. The result is a growing cohort of men living with intention, unburdened by the complexities that once defined adult milestones. When new legislative efforts like prenatal child support enter this environment, they do not occur in a vacuum. They intersect with existing sentiments and reinforce decisions already in motion. Men who have stepped back see these bills as further evidence that societal structures continue to emphasize extraction of resources from them without corresponding adjustments in other areas. This perception, whether fully accurate in every case or not, influences behavior on a large scale. Dating apps show declining engagement from certain demographics, marriage rates have shifted, and birth rates reflect broader hesitancy toward family formation. These trends are complex and multifactorial, but the legal and cultural climate around responsibility plays a noticeable role. Expanding the discussion, think about the daily choices that men making this walk away decision encounter. One wakes up in a quiet apartment he controls completely, enjoys a workout tailored to his goals, advances projects that excite him professionally, and spends evenings reading, gaming, or pursuing creative interests without interruption. There are no negotiations over shared expenses, no underlying worries about future claims on his income, and no emotional labor dedicated to maintaining fragile dynamics. His money stays with him to invest, save, or enjoy as he sees fit. His time belongs to pursuits that build rather than deplete his energy. Over months and years, this lifestyle compounds into tangible advantages in mental clarity, physical health, and financial position. He notices peers still entangled in cycles of conflict or obligation and feels gratitude for the path he chose. Contrast this with scenarios where prenatal obligations add pressure. A man learns of a pregnancy claim and must immediately consult legal counsel, gather documentation, and prepare for potential hearings or payment orders. Even if resolved favorably, the experience leaves a lasting impression, shaping future interactions with heightened caution. Multiply this across thousands of cases, and the cumulative effect on relationship formation becomes evident. Society may express concern over population declines or changing family norms, yet policies that heighten perceived risks for one side can contribute to those very outcomes. It is essential to approach these topics with clarity and directness while maintaining a professional tone that focuses on observable patterns rather than blame. The goal is not to vilify any group, but to examine incentives and consequences honestly. Women who advocate for stronger support mechanisms during pregnancy often do so from positions of genuine need or principle, seeking stability for themselves and their children. Men who respond by limiting involvement are exercising rational self interest based on the information and experiences available to them. Bridging this gap would require addressing root causes like trust erosion, communication breakdowns, and legal asymmetries in a comprehensive manner. Until then, individual choices will continue to reflect personal assessments of risk and reward. To add more depth to the storytelling, let us follow the arc of a man who once fully embraced societal expectations. In his early adulthood, he dated actively, provided generously on outings, and envisioned building a family. Over time, repeated encounters with what he perceived as one sided demands, combined with stories from friends about support battles and custody disputes, prompted reflection. He began questioning why his efforts seemed undervalued or met with additional requirements rather than mutual appreciation. Exposure to online discussions, personal finance realities, and legal overviews highlighted patterns that made traditional paths less appealing. When he learned about expanding prenatal support concepts, it solidified his commitment to a different lifestyle. He downsized his commitments, focused on career milestones that increased his earnings, and cultivated hobbies like hiking, skill building courses, and community volunteering on his schedule. Years later, he describes a profound sense of liberation, noting that his health metrics improved, his savings grew steadily, and his overall satisfaction with daily life reached new heights. This kind of personal evolution is repeated in variations among men from diverse backgrounds, professions, and age groups. Some are blue collar workers prioritizing physical trades and outdoor recreation. Others are professionals in tech, finance, or creative fields who leverage their skills for independent income streams. What unites them is a commitment to self mastery and a refusal to participate in systems they view as unbalanced. They engage with content that validates their observations, share strategies for maintaining boundaries, and support one another in pursuing fulfillment outside conventional scripts. The result is not societal withdrawal in a negative sense, but a reallocation of energy toward areas where they see clearer returns on investment. As we continue examining the implications of these laws, another angle involves the potential for increased distrust between men and women. When legislation appears to expand obligations in one direction without parallel expansions in rights or protections, it can fuel narratives of unfairness. Men may become more guarded in interactions, opting for minimal engagement or complete avoidance to mitigate exposure. Women may interpret this as disinterest or immaturity, leading to further polarization in dating spaces. Over time, this dynamic can reduce opportunities for genuine connection and mutual understanding, perpetuating cycles of frustration on both sides. Honest dialogue that acknowledges valid concerns from all perspectives offers the best path forward, though achieving it requires setting aside ideological filters. In practical terms, men navigating this landscape often adopt strategies like thorough vetting in any remaining social interactions, emphasis on personal protection and documentation, and a strong focus on financial independence that cannot be easily compromised. They educate themselves on legal basics, maintain clear boundaries, and prioritize activities that enhance resilience. This proactive stance empowers them to live according to their values, even as external policies evolve. It also serves as a form of pattern recognition in action, where past collective experiences inform present decisions to avoid foreseeable pitfalls. To elaborate further without compression, the concept of men walking away encompasses more than romantic withdrawal. It includes a philosophical realignment toward individualism and self determination that has roots in broader cultural critiques. After years of hearing narratives that portrayed certain masculine traits as problematic or in need of reform, many men internalize the lesson that their natural inclinations might be better expressed in private or redirected entirely. They stopped seeking approval from systems or groups that seemed predisposed to criticism and instead sought validation through tangible achievements and internal peace. This mental shift proved liberating as it freed cognitive resources previously spent on conforming to external ideals. When layered with financial and legal considerations like prenatal support, the appeal of this approach strengthens. A man who keeps his resources under direct control can weather economic fluctuations, pursue opportunities spontaneously, and provide for himself without intermediaries or disputes. He avoids the scenario where a single claim or event triggers automatic deductions or obligations that disrupt carefully built stability. This self contained security becomes a cornerstone of his lifestyle, allowing focus on long term goals such as retirement planning, travel, skill acquisition, or simply enjoying the present moment without looming concerns. Society at large continues to grapple with declining marriage and birth rates, increased reports of loneliness across demographics, and debates over how to support families effectively. Proposals for prenatal child support represent one attempted solution within that context, aiming to bolster resources for expectant parents and signal commitment to early life. Whether these measures will achieve their stated goals or inadvertently accelerate existing trends toward disengagement remains a question that time and careful observation will answer. In the meantime, men who have already made their choices demonstrate through their lives that alternative paths to fulfillment exist and can be deeply rewarding when pursued with intention. Building on this foundation, let us consider specific elements of the bills in greater detail to ensure a complete understanding. The Supporting Healthy Pregnancy Act would mandate that states create or enhance mechanisms for identifying biological fathers and enforcing the 50% contribution to qualified expenses. This includes not only direct medical costs, but also related premiums, potentially creating a standardized framework nationwide if adopted widely. Implementation would likely involve coordination between family courts, child support enforcement agencies, and healthcare providers to verify claims and process payments efficiently. Challenges could include cases of disputed paternity, interstate moves, or situations where the alleged father lacks sufficient income or documentation, all of which would require additional procedural safeguards to maintain fairness. Similarly, the Unborn Child Support Act at the federal level seeks to integrate pregnancy period obligations into existing Title IVD child support structures, allowing retroactive application once an order is established. This could streamline some processes, but also raises questions about administrative capacity and the balance between swift support and due process. State experiments, such as the Kentucky approach, provide real world testing grounds where outcomes can be monitored for effectiveness, unintended consequences, and adjustments needed over time. For men evaluating these developments, the key takeaway often centers on personal risk management. They calculate that reducing exposure to scenarios involving potential claims minimizes the chance of disruption. This leads to lifestyles characterized by discipline, focus, and selective engagement with the world. They maintain physical fitness as a foundation for longevity and capability, pursue education or side ventures for economic resilience, and cultivate mental habits that promote contentment independent of external circumstances. In many cases, they report that this approach has enhanced their interactions with family, friends, and colleagues because it stems from a place of stability rather than obligation or resentment. The intensity of these choices reflects a direct response to accumulated experiences rather than fleeting emotions. Men have observed, analyzed, and adapted based on patterns that affect their well being and future prospects. By walking away from elements that no longer align, they reclaim agency and redirect it toward constructive ends. This is evident in rising participation in male focused communities centered on self improvement, finance, fitness, and philosophy, where discussions emphasize practical strategies over complaints. To weave in more rhetorical pacing, one might reflect on the irony that efforts intended to strengthen family support could instead highlight divisions that discourage family formation altogether. When men perceive the deck as stacked with expanding duties and limited corresponding benefits or protections, their rational response is caution. This does not diminish the validity of supporting pregnant women or children, but underscores the need for policies that account for incentives on all sides. Balanced approaches that incorporate mandatory early paternity verification, clear guidelines on expense categories, and equitable enforcement could mitigate some concerns, though trust once eroded takes time to rebuild. As this conversation unfolds, it becomes apparent that the phenomenon of men prioritizing solitude and self focus is multifaceted. It stems from cultural messaging that de emphasized male value, legal systems perceived as biased toward certain outcomes, economic pressures that make traditional provider roles more burdensome, and personal realizations that happiness can be achieved through simpler, self directed means. Prenatal child support bills add one more data point to that analysis, prompting further reflection on whether current frameworks encourage cooperation or withdrawal. Men who have embraced this path often describe a process of rediscovery. They reconnect with interests sidelined during years of pursuing relationships, experiment with routines that optimize their energy, and build networks based on shared values rather than romantic pursuit. The peace they find is not passive, but active, rooted in deliberate choices that align actions with long term vision. They keep their living spaces orderly and functional, their finances streamlined and growing, and their minds engaged with books, skills, or projects that challenge and reward them. This lifestyle, while different from mainstream expectations, demonstrates resilience and adaptability in the face of societal shifts. Continuing onward, one important dimension worth examining involves the economic calculations that many men perform when they weigh the potential impact of these evolving support obligations against their current earning power and life goals. A professional in a mid level career position, for instance, might project his annual income and subtract the possibility of unexpected deductions that could stretch over years. If a prenatal claim escalates into Hunt's ongoing orders, he factors in not just the immediate 50% split of medical bills, but the broader ripple effects on his ability to save for a home, invest in retirement accounts, or pursue advanced certifications that could accelerate his trajectory. This mental budgeting exercise often leads him to conclude that preserving full control over his resources provides a stronger foundation for long term security than entering situations where external factors could intervene unpredictably. He begins tracking his expenses with greater precision, allocates portions of each paycheck toward diversified holdings, and develops contingency plans that emphasize liquidity and flexibility. Over time, this disciplined approach compounds, creating a buffer that allows him to respond to opportunities or setbacks on his own schedule rather than reacting to mandated timelines imposed by outside parties. This forward thinking mindset extends beyond finances into how men structure their social environments and daily routines. Many deliberately cultivate circles of like minded individuals who share similar priorities around self reliance and boundary setting. They organize informal gatherings centered on skill sharing sessions, such as learning basic home repairs, discussing market trends, or participating in group fitness challenges that build camaraderie without introducing romantic complexities. These connections reinforce a sense of community grounded in mutual respect for individual autonomy, where conversations focus on solutions and observable results instead of grievances. In one such group, a participant might describe how he redirected energy previously spent navigating dating uncertainties into mastering a new language, opening doors to international remote work options that further enhance his independence. Others nod in recognition, sharing parallel stories of how streamlined living arrangements, such as opting for smaller, efficient spaces or shared utility setups among friends, free up capital for experiences like extended travel or equipment purchases that align with personal passions. The collective wisdom that emerges emphasizes proactive design of lifestyles that minimize vulnerabilities while maximizing personal agency. Another layer to consider is the psychological shift that occurs when men internalize the principle that their value does not depend on fulfilling provider roles defined by others. This realization often unfolds gradually through quiet reflection during solitary activities like long walks in nature or focused work on personal projects. A man might recall earlier phases of his life when he measured success by external markers such as relationship status or social approval, only to discover through trial and error that those markers frequently led to diminished returns on his investment of time and emotion. He starts journaling his observations, noting patterns in how certain interactions drain his mental reserves while others replenish them. This practice sharpens his ability to discern genuine compatibility from superficial exchanges, leading him to reserve deeper engagement for platonic or professional contexts where reciprocity feels balanced and voluntary. As confidence in this internal compass grows, he experiences reduced anxiety about societal narratives that pressure men toward specific milestones. Instead, he channels that mental energy into creative outlets, whether developing a side business, composing music, or volunteering in local initiatives that match his interests without strings attached. The resulting sense of purpose feels authentic because it originates from within rather than from fulfilling expectations that seem increasingly misaligned with modern realities. Society continues to register the effects of these individual choices at a macro level, with demographic data revealing sustained declines in marriage rates and birth numbers across many developed nations. Policymakers respond with various initiatives aimed at encouraging family formation. Yet, the introduction of measures like prenatal support requirements can sometimes send mixed signals about the balance of responsibilities. When men perceive that legal frameworks are expanding the scope of financial accountability without equivalent expansions in decision making authority or protections against unfounded claims, their inclination toward caution intensifies. They study available resources on family law fundamentals, consult with professionals on preventive strategies, and adjust their behavior to prioritize verifiable mutual understanding in any remaining interactions. This heightened awareness does not equate to isolation, but rather to intentional selectivity that preserves their peace and productivity. Many report that this selectivity has improved the quality of their existing relationships with family members and colleagues as interactions become more straightforward and less burdened by unspoken assumptions about roles. To illustrate through an extended narrative arc, follow the progression of a man who transitioned from a high pressure corporate environment to building his own consulting practice. Early in his career, he maintained an active social calendar, attending events and meeting potential partners with the hope of establishing a stable partnership. Repeated instances where financial gestures were expected without corresponding commitment prompted him to reassess his approach. He began allocating more hours to professional development courses and networking within industry groups that valued expertise over personal status. When discussions about prenatal support legislation surfaced in news cycles, he viewed them through the lens of his own projections, calculating how such obligations could intersect with irregular income streams common in entrepreneurship. This prompted him to formalize contracts with clients more rigorously and maintain detailed records of all professional activities. Simultaneously, he redesigned his living space to support deep work periods, incorporating dedicated zones for focused tasks and recovery. The outcome was a thriving business that generated sufficient revenue to fund personal goals, including periodic retreats for strategic planning and skill refinement. He describes the transition as liberating, noting that the clarity gained from reduced external entanglements allowed innovative ideas to surface more readily, benefiting both his clients and his own sense of accomplishment. Expanding on the theme of self rediscovery, many men find that embracing minimalism extends naturally to their physical environments and possessions. They evaluate each item in their homes against criteria of utility and genuine joy, donating or selling what no longer serves a clear purpose. This process often uncovers previously overlooked space that they repurpose for hobbies such as woodworking, digital art creation, or building custom fitness setups. One individual might convert a spare room into a workshop where he crafts furniture pieces as both practical additions and meditative practices, finding satisfaction in the tangible results of his labor. Another focuses on curating a digital library of resources on history, philosophy, and science, dedicating evenings to reading and note taking that expand his worldview. These activities foster a quiet confidence that stems from competence rather than validation from others. As they refine their surroundings and routines, they notice improvements in sleep quality, energy levels, and overall resilience, attributes that further reinforce their commitment to the chosen path. The minimalist ethos becomes a form of quiet rebellion against consumer driven pressures that once tied self worth to accumulation or status symbols associated with traditional family life. Rhetorically, it is worth pondering how cultural conversations around equality and responsibility have evolved in ways that sometimes overlook the cumulative impact on male decision making. For decades, public discourse emphasized dismantling certain barriers for women while simultaneously questioning aspects of male behavior and contribution. This created an environment where men absorbed subtle and overt messages that their presence or efforts were conditionally valued. In response, large numbers began quietly reorienting their priorities toward domains where their contributions received direct, measurable feedback. They invested in trades, technology skills, or entrepreneurial ventures that rewarded competence without requiring navigation of shifting social expectations. When legislative proposals extend financial duties earlier into the reproductive process, these men interpret them as continuation of a pattern rather than a corrective measure. They respond by further insulating their core resources and time, viewing such insulation as prudent stewardship rather than avoidance. This perspective gains strength from observable trends in workforce participation, where men increasingly gravitate toward flexible or independent work arrangements that align with their preference for control. Another practical consideration involves health and wellness strategies that men adopt to sustain their independent lifestyles over decades. Recognizing that long term vitality supports autonomy, they prioritize consistent exercise regimens tailored to their bodies and schedules, incorporating strength training, cardiovascular work, and mobility practices that prevent injury and maintain functionality. Nutrition becomes a deliberate area of study, with many experimenting with meal preparations that optimize energy without excess complexity. Regular medical checkups are scheduled proactively, and they educate themselves on preventive care to address issues before they escalate. Mental health practices such as meditation, structured reflection periods, or engaging with thoughtful content help process experiences without external dependency. These habits compound into robust physical and psychological reserves that allow them to pursue ambitious goals without the fatigue that often accompanies entangled personal dynamics. Stories shared within supportive circles highlight how such regimens have enabled career pivots, creative achievements, or simply sustained enjoyment of daily life free from recurring stressors. As demographic shifts continue, some analysts point to the role of economic incentives in shaping family related behaviors. Men who maintain full command of their earnings can respond more nimbly to market changes, career opportunities, or personal interests. They build emergency funds that provide security during transitions, invest in assets that generate passive income, and avoid commitments that could constrain their options. This financial agility contrasts with scenarios where support obligations create fixed outflows that limit adaptability. The contrast becomes particularly evident during economic downturns or industry disruptions, where flexibility can determine outcomes. Men who have structured their lives around self preservation often navigate these periods with greater composure, leveraging their prepared resources to retrain, relocate, or launch new initiatives. Their experiences contribute to a growing body of anecdotal evidence suggesting that intentional independence can serve as a stabilizing force amid broader uncertainties. Delving into the interpersonal realm, the decision to limit romantic involvement frequently leads to more authentic platonic connections. Men report forming friendships based on shared activities or intellectual interests rather than romantic potential, resulting in interactions characterized by straightforward communication and mutual benefit. They participate in book clubs, sports leagues, or volunteer projects where the focus remains on the activity itself. These relationships provide social fulfillment without the layered expectations that can complicate dating. Over time, this selectivity refines their social skills as they learn to express needs and boundaries clearly from the outset. The absence of unspoken romantic undercurrents often leads to deeper conversations and more reliable support networks. Many describe feeling more present in these friendships because their energy is not divided by the navigation of potential conflicts or mismatched intentions. To extend the narrative further, imagine a man in his mid 40s who, after 2 decades of observing patterns in his social circle, committed fully to a path of self directed living. He had witnessed acquaintances cycle through relationships marked by financial strain and legal involvement, prompting him to chart a different course. He downsized his career ambitions to a sustainable consulting role that afforded ample free time for pursuits like sailing and photography. His weekends involve solo excursions on the water where he captures images that he later edits and shares in small online communities of enthusiasts. The solitude on the boat becomes a space for strategic thinking about future projects, free from distractions. He maintains light contact with extended family through occasional visits planned on his terms, contributing when he chooses rather than out of obligation. This balance has allowed him to develop a collection of experiences that enrich his perspective, from learning celestial navigation to studying regional history during port stops. He reflects that the clarity gained from reduced entanglements has heightened his appreciation for simple moments, transforming what others might view as routine into sources of profound satisfaction. The broader societal conversation around these trends often includes calls for renewed emphasis on mutual respect and balanced expectations. Men who have walked away from conventional dating scripts frequently express openness to relationships that demonstrate clear reciprocity and respect for individual autonomy from the beginning. They advocate for cultural shifts that recognize the legitimacy of diverse life choices, including those centered on personal peace and productivity. In their view, policies that address pregnancy costs should incorporate safeguards that protect all parties from premature or unverified claims, fostering environments where cooperation can occur voluntarily rather than through mandated mechanisms. This perspective underscores the importance of transparent dialogue that acknowledges the validity of different lived experiences without assigning inherent roles based on gender alone. Health insurance considerations also play a role in how men approach long term planning. With awareness of rising medical costs, they research options that provide comprehensive coverage without excessive premiums, often opting for high deductible plans paired with dedicated savings accounts. They review policy details meticulously, comparing features across providers to ensure alignment with their needs for preventive care and unexpected events. This diligence extends to estate planning documents, where they designate beneficiaries and outline wishes clearly to avoid future complications. Such preparations reflect a commitment to responsible self management that extends across all areas of life, reinforcing the stability they have cultivated through deliberate choices. Education and continuous learning remain central to the lifestyles many men adopt. They enroll in online courses covering topics from financial literacy to technical skills, dedicating consistent time each week to absorption and application of new knowledge. This commitment keeps their minds sharp and opens pathways to side income or career advancement that they control. Some focus on languages to facilitate travel or global opportunities, while others delve into scientific concepts that spark intellectual curiosity. The process of mastering new material provides intrinsic rewards that contrast with the external validations once sought through social conformity. Over years, this accumulation of knowledge builds intellectual capital that enhances problem solving abilities and adaptability in various contexts. Rhetorically, one can observe that the phenomenon of men prioritizing independence represents a rational adaptation to the incentive landscape they encounter. When legal and cultural frameworks appear to expand responsibilities in certain directions without parallel adjustments elsewhere, individuals respond by adjusting their level of participation. This adjustment is not uniform, but varies according to personal circumstances, values, and risk tolerance. Some maintain minimal social engagement while focusing intensely on professional mastery. Others blend selective interactions with robust self care practices. What unites these approaches is a shared emphasis on aligning actions with internal assessments rather than external prescriptions. The resulting diversity of lifestyles enriches the overall social fabric by demonstrating viable alternatives to traditional paths. In practical daily terms, men following this route often establish morning and evening routines that anchor their days in purpose and recovery. A typical morning might include physical movement followed by review of goals and focused work blocks. Evenings could involve winding down with reflective reading or light creative tasks that promote restful sleep. These structures minimize decision fatigue and create space for spontaneous opportunities when they arise. Nutrition is approached methodically, with meal planning that supports sustained energy without unnecessary complexity. Tracking progress through simple metrics helps maintain momentum and allows for timely adjustments. The cumulative effect is a lifestyle that feels sustainable and rewarding over extended periods. As discussions around family policy continue, attention to implementation details becomes crucial. Any system designed to address prenatal expenses would benefit from clear definitions of eligible costs, standardized processes for paternity verification, and timelines that allow for due consideration on all sides. Men who value fairness often suggest that such frameworks should include mechanisms for mediation before escalation to formal orders, reducing adversarial elements that constrain resources. They point to the importance of education campaigns that inform all parties about rights and responsibilities early, potentially preventing misunderstandings. While opinions differ on the optimal design, the common thread is recognition that effective policies require careful balancing to avoid unintended discouragement of positive behaviors. The narrative of self preservation also intersects with environmental and lifestyle choices that many men explore. They adopt practices like reducing consumption footprints through mindful purchasing, exploring renewable energy options for their living spaces, or participating in local conservation efforts. These activities align with their preference for control and long term thinking, providing additional layers of satisfaction derived from contributing to causes they select voluntarily. One man might install solar panels on his property after thorough research, enjoying both cost savings and the knowledge of reduced reliance on external systems. Another organizes community cleanup events that combine physical activity with social good on his terms. These endeavors enhance their sense of agency while fostering connections based on shared practical interests. To deepen the exploration, consider how technological advancements have facilitated the independent lifestyles many men pursue. Access to remote work tools, online marketplaces, and educational platforms has lowered barriers to self directed careers and learning. Men leverage these resources to build income streams that operate independently of traditional employment structures, allowing greater flexibility in scheduling and location. They experiment with automation for routine tasks, freeing time for higher value activities. This technological fluency supports the minimalist ethos by enabling efficient management of resources and information. As a result, they maintain connectivity to global opportunities without sacrificing the peace of controlled environments. The psychological benefits reported by those who have embraced this path include enhanced emotional regulation and reduced reactivity to external events. Through consistent practices of reflection and boundary maintenance, they develop resilience that buffers against societal pressures or media narratives. This inner stability translates into more measured responses in professional settings and personal interactions, often earning respect from peers who observe their composure. Many describe a gradual release from earlier anxieties about meeting undefined standards, replaced by contentment rooted in self defined success metrics. The freedom to pursue interest without justification further amplifies this positive feedback loop, creating lives characterized by sustained motivation and quiet achievement. As these legislative efforts progress through committees and public debate, attention turns to the specific mechanics that would govern how states actually administer prenatal financial responsibilities if the measures advance. The Supporting Healthy Pregnancy Act, introduced in December 2025 by Representative Ashley Hinson and referred to the House Ways and Means Committee, envisions states developing clear protocols for calculating and collecting the designated share of pregnancy related expenses. This would involve coordination between existing child support enforcement agencies and healthcare providers to identify qualifying costs such as specialized testing, nutritional counseling, or transportation to appointments. Administrators would need to establish verification steps that respect medical privacy while ensuring timely processing, potentially through standardized forms submitted by the expectant parent with supporting documentation from physicians. The goal, as framed, is to create a seamless pathway that reduces immediate financial strain without overwhelming judicial resources. Yet, the practical rollout would require training for caseworkers on handling sensitive timing issues around conception estimates and relationship statuses at the time of filing. Parallel to this, the Unborn Child Support Act, reintroduced in early 2025 by Senator Kevin Cramer and Representative Claudia Tenney, seeks to amend federal guidelines under the Social Security Act, enabling retroactive application of obligations once a court order is secured. The bill allows the pregnant individual to request inclusion of pregnancy period expenses, with a physician's input helping determine the relevant months for calculation. Existing state rules on paternity establishment would still apply, meaning courts retain authority to require evidence before finalizing amounts. This structure aims to empower choice by letting the requesting party decide whether to pursue the support while providing a framework that could integrate with current enforcement tools like wage withholding or tax refund intercepts once the child arrives. Proponents highlight the potential to offset burdens estimated in the thousands for comprehensive prenatal care, positioning the measure as a targeted way to affirm support for new life from its earliest stages without mandating universal application. At the state level, Kentucky's earlier Senate Bill 110, which advanced in 2024 with provisions for retroactive coverage up to 9 months prior to birth when orders are entered within the first year, offers a glimpse into how such systems might function in practice. The amended approach focused on post birth filings that could recapture pregnancy costs, including items like hospital stays or essential supplies, rather than requiring action strictly during gestation. This model balanced accessibility for those seeking assistance with procedural safeguards that allowed time for paternity confirmation and financial assessment after delivery. Other states have explored similar ideas in recent sessions, prompting discussions among legal experts about harmonizing definitions of eligible expenses across jurisdictions to prevent inconsistencies for families that cross state lines. Implementation would likely involve updates to case management software, additional funding allocations for administrative overhead, and pilot programs to test efficiency before full scale adoption. One emerging consideration in these policy conversations centers on the administrative burden placed on courts and agencies already managing high caseloads. Judges would face decisions about interim orders when disputes arise over timing or amounts, potentially necessitating expedited hearings or alternative dispute resolution options to keep proceedings moving. Enforcement mechanisms might extend to garnishment of future earnings or liens on property, raising questions about proportionality for individuals at different income levels. Legal scholars note that robust appeal processes would be essential to address errors in initial calculations or challenges to paternity claims, ensuring the system maintains credibility and fairness. Without sufficient resources dedicated to these expansions, backlogs could develop, delaying relief for those who qualify while creating uncertainty for those responding to claims. From an economic perspective, the cumulative impact on workforce participation and savings behaviors warrants careful examination. Individuals who anticipate potential obligations may accelerate plans for diversified income sources, such as developing freelance portfolios or acquiring certifications in high demand fields that offer remote flexibility. They analyze market data to identify sectors with strong growth trajectories, positioning themselves to weather variable financial pressures. This proactive stance often leads to higher overall productivity, as can energy previously allocated to navigating relational uncertainties shifts towards skill enhancement and opportunity scouting. Over time, aggregated choices like these can influence regional economies, with concentrations of self directed professionals contributing to innovation hubs or entrepreneurial ecosystems that operate independently of traditional family centric incentives. Demographic modeling suggests that sustained shifts in personal priorities could affect everything from housing demand to consumer spending patterns. When large numbers opt for compact living arrangements optimized for efficiency rather than expansion, real estate markets may see adjustments in preferences for multi bedroom properties versus streamlined units with amenities focused on individual wellness. Retail sectors attuned to minimalist lifestyles might experience growth in durable goods designed for longevity and versatility, while industries tied to family milestones could adapt their offerings to reflect more varied life paths. Public policy analysts track these trends through census data and labor statistics, noting correlations between declining partnership rates and increases in solo entrepreneurship or continued education enrollment. The interplay highlights how personal decisions aggregate into structural changes that ripple through taxation bases, infrastructure planning, and social service allocations. Philosophically, the embrace of autonomy invites reflection on the nature of responsibility in contemporary society. Many who prioritize self directed paths articulate a view that true accountability begins with honest self assessment and voluntary commitments rather than externally imposed duties. They explore writings on Stoicism and existential choice, drawing parallels between historical figures who forged independent courses amid societal expectations and their own navigation of modern constraints. This intellectual engagement fosters a framework where decisions about involvement stem from deliberate evaluation of mutual benefit and long term compatibility, not default assumptions about roles. The process cultivates resilience as individuals learn to derive meaning from internal metrics of progress, such as completed projects or mastered disciplines, rather than relational status. In doing so, they model a form of maturity that values clarity and consent in all interactions, potentially influencing cultural norms toward greater emphasis on explicit agreements. Storytelling from this vantage reveals the quiet transformations that unfold over years. A man who once followed conventional career ladders discovers fulfillment in transitioning to project based work that aligns with seasonal rhythms, allowing extended periods for reflection and physical challenges like endurance cycling routes mapped across varied terrain. He documents his journeys through detailed logs that double as planning tools for future adventures, finding that the discipline of preparation translates into sharper business acumen when negotiating contracts. Socially, he maintains selective correspondence with distant acquaintances through thoughtful written exchanges that avoid superficial updates, preferring depth over frequency. This approach preserves energy for pursuits like studying architectural principles to renovate his living space incrementally. Each modification enhancing functionality while reflecting personal taste honed through trial. The satisfaction derived from these incremental achievements reinforces his conviction that a well ordered life emerges from consistent alignment between actions and core principles. Another dimension involves the integration of technology into streamlined routines that support sustained independence. Individuals leverage applications for automated budgeting that flag anomalies in spending patterns, ensuring resources remain allocated toward growth oriented goals. They experiment with wearable devices that monitor recovery metrics, adjusting training intensities based on data rather than external advice. Online platforms facilitate access to specialized knowledge communities where participants exchange insights on everything from tax optimization strategies to ergonomic workspace designs, building collective intelligence without centralized authority. This digital fluency enables rapid adaptation when policies or economic conditions shift, as users can quickly research precedents or model scenarios using available tools. The result is a lifestyle characterized by informed agility, where unforeseen developments prompt calculated responses rather than reactive scrambling. Legal preparedness forms another cornerstone of strategic living in this context. Many dedicate time to understanding foundational principles of contract law and asset protection, consulting resources that outline best practices for documentation in professional and personal dealings. They draft clear agreements for any collaborative ventures, specifying terms that safeguard individual contributions and exit options. Estate considerations receive attention through tools like revocable trusts or beneficiary designations that align with personal values, ensuring smooth transitions without default reliance on intestacy rules. This foresight minimizes vulnerabilities that could arise from external claims, allowing focus on value creation rather than defensive positioning. Workshops and webinars on these topics attract growing audiences seeking practical knowledge that complements their emphasis on self reliance. Culturally, the visibility of diverse life architectures challenges long standing assumptions about universal milestones. Media representations increasingly include narratives of individuals thriving through unconventional structures, from digital nomads optimizing tax jurisdictions to artisans building micro enterprises around niche skills. These stories normalize the idea that fulfillment can manifest in multiple forms, each valid when rooted in conscious choice. Public forums host discussions on balancing individual liberty with collective well being, exploring how policies might better accommodate varied preferences without privileging one model. Participants emphasize the importance of neutral frameworks that neither penalize nor incentivize specific paths, fostering environments where people contribute according to their capacities and interests. Economic forecasting models that incorporate behavioral adjustments predict that expanded personal savings rates among certain demographics could bolster capital markets, providing liquidity for infrastructure or innovation projects. When individuals retain greater portions of earnings for reinvestment, venture funding pools or community lending initiatives may expand organically. This dynamic could accelerate technological adoption in sectors like renewable energy or personalized health monitoring, areas where early adopters drive broader accessibility. Labor economists observe that flexible work preferences influence hiring practices, with organizations adapting to attract talent, valuing autonomy through remote options or results based evaluations. The feedback loop between personal strategies and market responses creates adaptive systems that reward foresight and adaptability. On the interpersonal front, those pursuing independent paths often develop refined communication protocols that emphasize transparency from initial exchanges. They articulate boundaries and expectations clearly in any social or professional context, reducing ambiguity that can lead to misalignment. This practice extends to networking events where conversations center on shared objectives rather than personal histories, yielding collaborations grounded in mutual utility. Over time, such habits build reputations for reliability and directness, opening doors to opportunities that align naturally with existing priorities. The absence of hidden agendas in these interactions contributes to lower stress levels and higher trust within selected circles, demonstrating that meaningful connections can flourish without traditional relational scaffolding. Reflecting on long term societal trajectories, one might consider how evolving definitions of contribution reshape civic engagement. Individuals who maintain strong personal foundations frequently participate in local governance through informed voting, public comment periods, or volunteer roles in nonpartisan initiatives. Their input draws from direct experience with resource management and risk assessment, enriching debates on fiscal policy or community development. This grounded perspective can counterbalance more abstract ideological approaches, promoting solutions that account for practical implementation challenges. As participation patterns shift, institutions may adapt by offering more modular involvement options that accommodate varied schedules and commitments. Health optimization strategies continue to evolve with advances in accessible diagnostics and wellness protocols. Many incorporate periodic comprehensive screenings that track biomarkers over time, adjusting lifestyle variables based on trends rather than isolated readings. They explore evidence based supplementation tailored to individual profiles, combined with movement practices that enhance both physical capacity and cognitive function. Mental acuity receives attention through structured problem solving exercises or language acquisition programs that maintain neural plasticity. And these investments yield compounding returns in the form of extended productive years and reduced dependency on external care systems, further supporting the ethos of self determination. Philosophical inquiries into the ethics of choice highlight tensions between collective responsibilities and personal sovereignty. Thinkers who examine these dynamics often advocate for frameworks that default to voluntary association while providing safety nets for genuine vulnerability. Applied to family policy, this suggests designing supports that encourage cooperation without embedding presumptions about participation levels. Men who have charted independent courses frequently express support for measures that address real needs through transparent, evidence based mechanisms that include input from all affected perspectives. Their stance reflects a commitment to equity defined by fairness in process rather than predetermined outcomes. In narrative terms, envision the gradual unfolding of a life recalibrated around seasonal cycles of effort and restoration. One individual structures his professional output around natural light patterns, completing intensive phases during longer days and dedicating shorter periods to strategic review and skill consolidation. He cultivates a small garden plot that supplies fresh produce while serving as a laboratory for testing sustainable techniques, each harvest reinforcing lessons in patience and incremental progress. Evenings bring engagement with archival materials on historical trade routes, inspiring analogies for modern supply chain optimizations in his consulting work. The integration of these elements creates a cohesive existence where leisure and labor inform one another, generating insights that enhance both domains. Friends who visit note the palpable calm that permeates the space, attributing it to the deliberate curation of routines that honor natural rhythms over imposed schedules. Technological integration extends to security and privacy measures that protect hard won stability. Individuals implement multi layered authentication for financial accounts, regularly audit access logs, and maintain offline backups of critical documents. They stay abreast of emerging threats through reputable sources, applying patches and updates promptly to minimize exposure. This vigilance parallels their approach to physical environments, where they install efficient systems that reduce utility dependencies while monitoring performance metrics. The combination of digital and analog safeguards creates resilient personal infrastructures capable of withstanding disruptions, whether policy shifts or market fluctuations. Educational pursuits remain lifelong, with many enrolling in specialized modules on emerging fields like data interpretation or sustainable design principles. They form study partnerships that meet virtually to dissect case studies, challenging assumptions, and refining analytical skills. The knowledge gained translates into practical applications, such as optimizing personal tax strategies or designing custom workflows that eliminate redundancies. This continuous learning mindset ensures relevance in dynamic environments, positioning participants to seize advantages when conditions change. It also models intellectual humility, as engagement with new material reveals the limits of prior understanding and opens pathways to further growth. As policy landscapes continue to develop, the importance of monitoring real world outcomes cannot be overstated. Pilot implementations in select jurisdictions could provide data on collection rates, dispute frequencies, and overall efficacy in meeting intended goals. Independent evaluations would help identify bottlenecks or inequities requiring adjustment, ensuring adaptations rest on empirical findings rather than assumptions. Stakeholders from various backgrounds contribute perspectives on usability, advocating for user friendly interfaces and application processes and clear explanatory materials that demystify requirements. Transparent reporting on results would build public confidence and guide future refinements. The broader cultural dialogue benefits from inclusion of voices articulating the value of diverse contribution models. When individuals demonstrate success through self directed efforts, they expand the collective imagination about viable ways to lead meaningful lives. This expansion reduces pressure to conform to singular templates, allowing talent and energy to flow toward areas of natural aptitude. Societies that accommodate such plurality often exhibit greater innovation and adaptability, as varied experiences generate novel solutions to shared challenges. The emphasis remains on voluntary participation and mutual respect, principles that underpin sustainable social cohesion. In wrapping the segment, the evolving conversation around prenatal support mechanisms and personal responses to them underscores the dynamic interplay between policy design and individual agency. Fresh adaptations in strategy, philosophy, and daily practice reveal how people navigate complexity while preserving core freedoms. Continued observation and thoughtful analysis of these patterns will illuminate pathways toward frameworks that honor both collective needs and personal sovereignty, fostering environments where diverse choices can coexist productively. As of early 2026, the Supporting Healthy Pregnancy Act, introduced by Representative Ashley Hinson on December 4th, 2025, and referred to the House Ways and Means Committee, remains in its initial stage without further markup or floor action recorded. The proposal continues to generate discussion among lawmakers focused on family economic stability, with Hinson emphasizing the need for shared responsibility in covering verifiable medical expenses from the confirmation of pregnancy onward. Companion efforts at the federal level include the Unborn Child Support Act, reintroduced in the Senate on January 23rd, 2025, by Senator Kevin Cramer, and in the House on February 6th, 2025, by Representative Claudia Tenney. These measures amend provisions under Title IV of the Social Security Act to require states to incorporate pregnancy period obligations into their child support enforcement plans, with retroactive application possible based on court orders requested by the pregnant parent and supported by physician determinations of conception timing. Both bills stress an opt in framework that preserves flexibility for the requesting party while maintaining existing state standards for proof of parentage before final enforcement. State level activity provides additional context for how these concepts translate into operational systems. In Kentucky, the 2024 Senate Bill 110 advanced with a committee substitute that ultimately permitted retroactive child support orders to cover up to 9 months prior to birth when filed within the first year after delivery, offering a tested model for recouping documented pregnancy expenses without mandating action strictly during gestation. Similar explorations have appeared in other legislatures, including Nebraska's Legislative Bill 1242, introduced in January 2026, which would permit courts to establish prenatal orders as early as 1 month after conception upon request and with appropriate evidence. Alabama lawmakers advanced Senate Bill 47 in February 2026 through the Judiciary Committee, extending potential retroactivity to conception in cases where paternity is established and orders entered timely post birth. These developments illustrate a patchwork of approaches where states experiment with timelines, documentation thresholds, and integration into existing enforcement infrastructures, creating a laboratory for observing real outcomes in collection efficiency and dispute resolution. Interstate coordination emerges as a critical implementation challenge given mobility patterns across the country. Families relocating during or after pregnancy could encounter differing rules on eligible expense categories or collection methods, necessitating clearer federal guidelines or reciprocal agreements to prevent gaps or overlaps in obligations. Administrators might develop centralized databases that track orders across jurisdictions while safeguarding sensitive health information under applicable privacy regulations. Pilot programs in participating states could test notification protocols that inform alleged parents promptly upon filing, allowing time for response and verification before amounts accrue. Such systems would need to balance speed of support delivery with procedural protections to uphold due process standards that courts have historically required in financial matters of this nature. From a macroeconomic vantage point, widespread adoption of earlier support obligations could influence household formation rates and associated consumption behaviors. Economic models incorporating behavioral elasticity suggest that heightened perceived financial exposure in reproductive contexts may accelerate shifts toward delayed or foregone partnerships, redirecting personal capital into individual retirement vehicles, equity investments, or human capital accumulation through advanced training. Aggregate savings rates could rise in cohorts practicing strategic independence, injecting additional liquidity into capital markets that fund infrastructure, research, or small business lending. Labor market analyses indicate potential growth in sectors offering high autonomy, such as specialized consulting, digital content creation, or precision trades, where compensation structures reward output over tenure and allow calibrated risk management. These adjustments ripple into public finance through altered dependency ratios and tax revenue streams, prompting forecasters to refine projections around long term entitlement funding and workforce productivity metrics. Philosophically, the discourse invites deeper inquiry into the foundations of consent within intimate and legal domains. When obligations attach at early stages of biological processes, questions surface about the alignment between voluntary participation in conception and subsequent mandated contributions detached from ongoing mutual agreement. Scholars, drawing from contract theory, examine whether default presumptions of shared duty adequately reflect the asymmetry in decision rights post conception, advocating for frameworks that prioritize explicit, informed commitments over retrofitted responsibilities. This lens encourages examination of agency as a core principle, where individuals retain capacity to shape their involvement through deliberate choices rather than default legal triggers. Applied thoughtfully, such principles could inform policy refinements that embed opt out mechanisms or tiered verification steps, fostering environments where accountability arises from mutual understanding instead of unilateral claims processed through state machinery. Storytelling from lived trajectories reveals how men navigating these dynamics construct layered architectures for sustained autonomy. One professional in the engineering field, after mapping potential exposure vectors across career phases, transitioned into modular project contracts that include explicit clauses limiting ancillary liabilities. He allocates blocks of time for immersive certification programs in emerging technologies, each completion unlocking higher rate engagements that compound his resource base. Evenings involve methodical review of industry reports paired with physical conditioning routines, calibrated to maintain peak operational capacity without external dependencies. His living environment features integrated systems for energy and information management that minimize variables outside his direct oversight, creating a self contained operational hub that supports extended focus periods. The cumulative effect manifests in accelerated milestone achievement from debt elimination to diversified asset portfolios, all anchored in routines that prioritize measurable progress over relational contingencies. Another narrative thread follows an individual who channeled observational insights into developing scalable digital tools for personal resource tracking. He designed interfaces that visualize multi year projections under varying obligation scenarios, incorporating variables for income volatility and expense categories. This work evolved into a subscription service providing anonymized scenario modeling to users seeking clarity in financial planning, generating revenue streams independent of traditional employment ties. Weekends incorporate exploratory travel to regions with distinct regulatory environments, allowing comparative analysis that informs both product refinement and personal relocation considerations. Social connections form around shared technical challenges rather than personal disclosures, yielding collaborative problem solving sessions that enhance skills without introducing layered expectations. The architecture sustains momentum through iterative feedback loops where each cycle of development reinforces self efficacy and expands optionality. Emerging adaptive strategies extend into wellness protocols that integrate biometric feedback with environmental design. Practitioners utilize accessible sensor arrays to monitor recovery indicators, adjusting nutrition and activity variables in real time to optimize cognitive and physical output. They experiment with spatial configurations that facilitate flow states, such as adjustable lighting and acoustic treatments that support deep concentration or restorative downtime. These practices compound into resilience profiles that buffer against external volatility, whether economic cycles or policy adjustments. Career pivots become calculated maneuvers informed by trend monitoring, with many layering multiple income channels that activate selectively based on performance metrics rather than fixed commitments. The approach reframes uncertainty as navigable terrain through preparation and pattern analysis, yielding lifestyles characterized by deliberate calibration rather than reactive adjustment. Rhetorically, one might consider how cultural narratives around provision and partnership have intersected with technological enablement to accelerate diversification of life designs. When digital platforms democratize access to knowledge and markets, individuals gain levers to test hypotheses about optimal allocation of finite resources like time and attention. This empowerment surfaces tensions between inherited social scripts and empirically derived preferences, prompting reevaluation of what constitutes meaningful contribution in an era of expanded choice sets. Observers note that societies exhibiting tolerance for plural architectures often demonstrate greater adaptive capacity as varied experiments generate data points that inform collective learning without enforcing uniformity. The emphasis remains on preserving space for voluntary alignment while mitigating externalities that distort individual calculus. Legal scholarship in this domain increasingly addresses the intersection of family obligations with emerging privacy norms. Proposals for enhanced mediation interfaces could incorporate neutral facilitators trained in de escalation and fact finding, reducing escalation to formal adjudication. Standardized templates for expense documentation would streamline submissions while allowing contextual adjustments for documented medical necessities. Oversight bodies might publish annual transparency reports detailing collection volumes, dispute resolution rates, and demographic distributions to support evidence based refinements. Such measures aim to enhance legitimacy by demonstrating procedural integrity and responsiveness to observed outcomes across diverse participant profiles. In parallel, workforce development initiatives could incorporate modules on risk literacy that equip participants with tools for scenario planning across personal and professional domains. Educational institutions might expand offerings in applied decision science, blending quantitative modeling with qualitative assessment of incentive structures. Graduates entering the labor market would carry frameworks for evaluating trade offs between security and flexibility, informing choices that align with evolving personal priorities. This preparation contributes to a more resilient talent pool capable of navigating complexity without default reliance on external stabilizers. Narrative expansion follows the path of a specialist in supply chain optimization who applied systems thinking to personal architecture. He constructed decision trees that weigh variables such as geographic regulatory differences against lifestyle preferences, executing phased relocations that optimize tax and operational efficiencies. Professional engagements focus on advisory roles for mid sized enterprises seeking resilience enhancements, with compensation structured around performance milestones that afford scheduling autonomy. Leisure intervals incorporate immersive study of ecological principles applied to urban microenvironments, resulting in custom modifications that enhance habitat quality while reducing maintenance overhead. Interactions with peers center on technical exchanges that advance mutual capabilities, maintaining boundaries that preserve focus. The integrated system sustains high output with controlled input, demonstrating how disciplined application of analytical methods translates into tangible sovereignty. Technological augmentation continues to evolve through adoption of decentralized verification tools that enhance documentation integrity without centralized vulnerabilities. Users implement blockchain adjacent ledgers for timestamp records of agreements or transactions, creating auditable trails that support dispute resolution when needed. Artificial intelligence assistants trained on public legal corpora provide preliminary analysis of scenario implications, flagging considerations for professional consultation. These capabilities lower barriers to informed navigation while reinforcing the principle that preparation precedes participation. Integration remains selective, with emphasis on tools that augment rather than supplant human judgment in matters of personal consequence. Cultural evolution manifests in shifting representations of success that encompass modular rather than linear trajectories. Creative works explore protagonists who engineer fulfillment through sequenced phases of mastery and reflection, challenging monolithic definitions of achievement. Public discourse increasingly accommodates analysis of incentive feedback loops, where policy signals interact with behavioral responses to produce emergent patterns. Contributors from varied disciplines bring empirical observations that enrich understanding of how aggregated choices shape institutional forms over time. The dialogue benefits from commitment to falsifiability, testing assumptions against observable data rather than prescriptive ideals. Economic simulations that layer behavioral response functions project potential stabilization effects from diversified contribution models. When segments of the population channel resources into innovation or capital formation, secondary multipliers emerge in adjacent sectors such as education technology or personalized services. Fiscal analysts monitor shifts in dependency metrics, noting how self sustaining cohorts may alleviate pressure on certain transfer programs while generating revenue through consumption and investment channels. These dynamics invite nuanced policy calibration that preserves incentives for productivity across all participation levels. Philosophical threads weave through examinations of temporality in obligation formation. Concepts of prospective versus retrospective accountability prompt consideration of whether legal triggers should anchor to observable events or probabilistic estimates, with implications for predictability and planning. Frameworks emphasizing temporal consent suggest embedding review intervals that allow recalibration based on changed circumstances, enhancing adaptability without nullifying core responsibilities. Such refinements could align structures more closely with human decision making processes that unfold across extended horizons rather than discrete moments. Storytelling arcs illuminate the refinement process through iterative experimentation. An individual with background in quantitative analysis developed portfolio strategies that stress test against hypothetical obligation overlays, incorporating stochastic elements for timing and magnitude. Implementation involved phased asset reallocation paired with skill diversification that maintained employability across scenarios. Daily protocols integrated cognitive training with physical periodization, creating synergistic effects that elevated baseline performance. Community contributions occurred through open source modeling resources that others adapted to their contexts, fostering distributed problem solving without centralized coordination. The resulting equilibrium supported expansive exploration of intellectual and experiential domains, each iteration building upon prior validations. Strategic foresight extends into ecosystem design, where living and working spaces optimize for variable energy states. Configurations incorporate modular partitions that adapt to task requirements, complemented by environmental controls that maintain physiological comfort zones. Resource flows undergo continuous auditing to eliminate leakage, with surplus redirected toward capability expansion. This system's orientation treats the individual as an integrated unit where inputs and outputs align with defined objectives, minimizing entropy while maximizing throughput. External interfaces remain filtered through compatibility assessments that prioritize functional synergy over default inclusion. As legislative and cultural currents interact, the value of longitudinal observation becomes evident. Tracking cohorts over multi year intervals reveals adaptation velocities and outcome distributions that inform predictive accuracy. Independent research entities could aggregate anonymized data on strategy efficacy across demographics, publishing findings that guide both personal and policy adjustments. Transparency in methodology ensures reproducibility and invites refinement from diverse analytical perspectives. The collective knowledge base grows incrementally, supporting more sophisticated navigation of complex social terrains. As we reach the end of this discussion, it becomes clear that these emerging laws around prenatal child support represent more than simple policy adjustments. They sit at the intersection of deeply held beliefs about responsibility, fairness, and the practical realities that shape how men and women navigate to intimacy, family formation, and long term security in today's world. What we have explored together shows how bills like the Supporting Healthy Pregnancy Act and state level efforts in places like Kentucky and beyond seek to extend financial obligations earlier into the pregnancy timeline, aiming to distribute medical costs more evenly while raising important questions about verification processes, enforcement mechanics, and the broader incentives they create for personal decision making. Men who have already chosen paths of greater independence and self focus observe these developments through the lens of accumulated experience, pattern recognition, and a commitment to protecting the stability they have worked hard to build. Rather than rushing into situations that could introduce new layers of uncertainty or mandated contributions detached from ongoing mutual agreement, they continue refining strategies that prioritize autonomy, measurable progress, and peace of mind. This choice is not born from rejection of responsibility, but from a clear eyed assessment of how current and proposed frameworks align with observable outcomes and personal values. Society continues to wrestle with declining partnership rates and shifting family structures. Yet the responses we see from men stepping back reflect rational adaptation to the realities they encounter every day. Understanding these dynamics fully requires honest examination of both the intended goals of such legislation and the unintended consequences that may accelerate existing trends toward disengagement. The conversation remains open and complex, touching on economics, philosophy, legal design, and the fundamental ways human beings seek to live with dignity and control over their own futures. What did you think about what was discussed in this video? Do you agree with the points raised regarding the potential effects of prenatal child support laws on trust, relationships, and men's decisions to prioritize their own stability and peace? Leave a comment below and share your thoughts honestly. Your perspective adds to the larger dialogue and helps others who are navigating these same questions in their own lives. Like the video if you like it, don't forget to subscribe. And if you like the video, share the video. And just remember that all roads lead to MWA, men walking away, and cheers.
Nothing says you care like crypto. Nothing can compare. Nothing says you care like crypto. Oh, nothing can compare to crypto.